Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. Two quick things before introducing you to my guest. First, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast by clicking on the follow button and also clicking on the bell icon so you're alerted to each new edition of the program. Second, in addition to being the producer of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I've written 4 books, 3 novels, and 1 short story collection. In the episode notes, you will find a short link to my Amazon page and all 4 of those titles. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is award-winning political fiction writer Michael Fedor. Michael Fedor is author of 3 published novels. Their titles are Tree of Liberty, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, and The Senate Deception. With more than 20 years of political organizing experience, he is known for writing fast-paced and dramatic copy, underpinned by meticulous research into his subject matter. He transitioned from a classroom teacher 18 years ago. He was teaching English, decided to switch over to grassroots organizing. He has worked on political campaigns at every level, from local to presidential, gaining firsthand insight into the personal costs of pursuing power. A former candidate and elected official himself, Fedor retired from political life in 2020. I know you're probably thinking that's a little suspect because don't they say presidential ambitions? The only cure for presidential ambition is embalming fluid. So we can only assume that Michael didn't have presidential ambitions, or he would still be in the game, or he would be deceased. I can assure you that is not the case, as he will prove here momentarily. So after years in the political trenches, he took the leap into a long-held passion, writing. So he dusted off an old manuscript that he penned in 2004. He overhauled it, and that led to the release of his award-winning debut novel, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, the first of his Bull Moose series, which has already garnered multiple awards and critical acclaim for its intense plot, accurate detail, and its character development. Michael Fedor earned both master's and bachelor's degrees at Penn State University. He's a Nittany Lion, as you can see. And like his main character, Bull Moose, Fedor is an avid outdoorsman, a voracious reader, and a student of history. Michael Fedor, welcome to the program.
Mike, thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you as well. Let's start with, and I ask you to excuse me. I'm getting over a cold right now, and I'll end up muting myself and coughing for here and there, but all good for the moment. Talk to me about where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in western Pennsylvania, in what is clearly now the eastern shore of the Rust Belt. And my city, Newcastle, where I grew up, in the heydays, say 1920s, had a steel mill, a pottery, and a tin factory. Most of my immigrant relatives worked in one of those facilities, and it had a city of 50, 60,000 people. We had a governor from Pennsylvania who called Newcastle home for a while. And by the time I came on the scene in the 1970s, the bottom had fallen out of most or all of those industries. And it really, many of those factories ended up closing. And I like to joke that until I was about the age of 18, when I started traveling the country and the world, I thought every town in America had shuttered plants. Yeah. It wasn't until I started to travel that I got a sense that no, not every city in America is so destitute as Newcastle, Pennsylvania. So working class town.
Were these steel plants, or are you far broader than that?
Yeah, one was steel, and that one that steelworks still produces, but on a much lower scale today. It's been bought, sold, reopened, closed several times. The Pennsylvania Shenango China, which is very famous China, produced in the United States in the early 20th century. Claim to fame was it was White House China for a while. That plant ended up closing in the 60s, and so those are collector's items. And the tin mill, when tin was in its really major part of manufacturing. That was, I think, what helped to create the boom for Newcastle for many years.
Yeah, I grew up in upstate New York. I've been to Pittsburgh, and what a great job they did in Pittsburgh, resuscitating that city after the steel mills closed. And it's a beautiful city now, in an education city with Carnegie Mellon and not Johns Hopkins. It's Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, and I'm leaving
UPMC.
UPMC.
Carnegie Mellon and Duquesne,
and so on. Now, you went to Penn State. What did you study there? What was your undergrad degree?
So I started off, my first, I knew nothing about college, by the way. My parents were working class, blue collar. By the time I graduated high school, I wanted to get as far away from my roots as possible. And the furthest college I could get to was Ithaca College in the Finger Lakes.
Oh, I love it.
And I went there and studied for, a beautiful town on Lake Cayuga, and studied there for 18 months under an amazing professor, Marty Brownstein. I was a political science major at the time, until I took a legislative behaviors class and discovered just how terrible some of these career politicians were who had no life experience and no real career besides politics. So I did some volunteering in the community in Ithaca, worked for the Big Brothers Big Sisters, and discovered that I had a real talent with working with youth, and a lot of the social issues that I really was attracted to in politics were present in education. So I made a decision to change my major to education, to become a high school teacher, and discovered I was at the wrong school for that. Ithaca is a wonderful music school. It's a wonderful journalism school, liberal arts school, but it's not at the time a great school to get your secondary education teacher credentials, but Penn State was. And I had some friends from high school who were attending Penn State, and they worked to help me get enrolled. And so in 1999, I transferred down to main campus, and that's where I started studying secondary education with a focus in English and communications.
And then your graduate, you got a master's degree?
10 years later, after teaching for 5 years and then going into the American labor movement and political campaigns, I met Dr. Paul Clark in the midst of that, who's an amazing professor, recently retired in labor studies. And Paul encouraged me to enroll in the School of Labor and Relations from the labor side. They had lots of students from the HR side. They had very few from the labor side, come in and get a master's in human resources, employment relations, and organizational development. And did that in about 2 years total, a lot of hard work, and ended up in 2013 with my master's degree in HR.
Now, where are you now? Where do you live now? Are you in Harrisburg?
Yeah, I'm Harrisburg, state capital, Pennsylvania, and I have worked in D.C. In and out of the last 20 years. But yeah, Harrisburg is where we call home today.
Now, let's talk about the political office you held. Where did you work?
So in 2009, after the Obama administration just took root, and I had worked on that campaign, I really wanted to get involved in local government and also had my own political ambitions. I ran for a borough council seat in the town I was living in. This follows a time period where 5 years earlier I had been approached in another town we lived in before we got married. I was very active in the community, and I was approached, hey, a gentleman had a sudden heart attack and died who was a member of the city council. Would I be willing to take an appointment to city council? And I was excited. I said, sure. They said, well, we have one caveat. We need you to change your party registration. There's never been a member of this other party ever on council, and this council is not willing to make history in that regard. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. It was very altruistic in those days. And so I took a pass on that city council appointment. But when I got in 2009, I got elected to a borough council. It was a really fascinating borough in Perry County, Pennsylvania, a very rural town, a mountain town on the Appalachian Trail. But it had its own utility, its own water utility. It's had its own electric utility, amazingly enough. And it had just really a lot of fascinating issues, its own police force. And so I quickly cut my teeth. I think we figured that I was making like $1.25 an hour for the time that I invested. I think we got paid like $2,000 a year to be borough council members. But I think I had a good impact on the town when I served there, and I actually raised some eyebrows because I was someone who reached across the aisle and worked collaboratively in a bipartisan fashion. I used to say there is not a partisan way to keep the lights on, and there's not a partisan way to patrol our streets. It turns out 20 years later, maybe I was wrong, or maybe people have adopted a different philosophy today. But at the time, I was in the belief that we just had to work together to solve local problems. And I gained a lot of really amazing insights about local government. I went on to be a county party chairman. I went on to be a member of our state committee of my party when I was still a member of that party. And over time, I had run for some larger offices, some county offices, row offices. The last time I ran, I lost by 199 votes out of 50,000 cast. And that was the last straw. Wow. It was my Al Gore moment. I was like, I would rather have been blown out of the water.
You had the hanging chads and everything going on and all the recounts. Yes. Did you have a recount? Yeah. It's that close. You normally it triggers a recount, correct?
We could, and they there was not much to recount because it's at that point it's just electronic zeros and ones. The only thing to be recounted are absentee ballots and military ballots. And so yes, they recounted those things, but it was the same result. And it was heartbreaking. And as a candidate, I think you go to some dark places about what you could have done differently or where you could have spent your time differently on election day or leading up to it. And anecdotally, years after that election, so many people came up to me and said, Michael, we thought you were the shoe-in for this election, so we didn't bother to vote for you. We thought, someone else needed our vote on the other side of the aisle. What a terrible mistake that was to be such what looked to be the heir apparent to an open seat. I think the lesson learned is never look too confident, because if you look too confident, then people, they get lazy or they think you don't need their help. And I think that's a really hard lesson I learned in that process. But it was the last straw for me. I felt like I had done enough there. And while people tell me never say never, I am retired from political life, and I'm not going to be running for any offices anytime in the near 20 years.
Well, Barack Obama must have been an inspiration to you, because he was a community organizer, political organizer, becomes a senator, becomes a president. You're a political organizer yourself. He must have been somewhat inspirational as far as you're getting involved. But let's make the jump to writing. You decided after teaching, then politics, you decided to start writing. How old were you when you knew that you had a passion for writing, when you had, or at least an interest in writing?
I was 13 years old when I first wrote a story that had an emotional impact on another human. And it was, my parents were splitting up, and it was that Christmas. I had a writing assignment in English class, and I wrote a story called The Ornament, which I recently found in my basement. And if I ever get the courage, I'll scan it and add it to my website, because I've amazingly found the original text in a folder where my mom had all my writing. And this story was about a boy who lost his father, and the tree and his mom are trying to celebrate their first Christmas without his dad. And amazingly, this magic ornament appears on his Christmas tree. And it's kind of a recognition that his dad's still there, still watching him from somewhere. And yes, very allegorical to my own life at the time. But it was an amazing piece of writing, I guess, for a 13-year-old, because my teachers passed it around the building. Everyone was reading it. Stephanie Felina, who was my gifted acceleration teacher, she pulled me aside and told me what an amazing piece of writing it was, and I really had a talent for writing, and I needed to make sure that I continued to write. So she would pull me out once a day and just give me short story prompts to write. And I really credit Stephanie for helping me to develop that muscle when I was 13 and needed some pushing to make sure I didn't lose that talent I had.
Wow. What a great story. So when you decided that, look, I'm going to start writing fiction, and you decided I'm going to write political thrillers, was there a triggering event of any kind? Was it the decision just to leave politics, and then it kind of gave you a fresh start? Was there something else going on? What really prompted you?
So there's, I think, two major events, I think, in that timeline between like 1993 and 2023. And the first occurred in 2004. I was teaching public school at that time. I was teaching a lot of Ray Bradbury. I was teaching Mark Twain. I was teaching a lot of American literature, the 11th grade curriculum in the school district that I was teaching in. And the 2004 election left me feeling very unsettled because the 2000 election had made me feel like things had been stolen because of the Supreme Court's intervention. In 2004, I just felt pretty raw that the political landscape needed some answers, and John Kerry and George Bush were not the answers. And I started writing a book. I started writing a thriller about the political landscape in which voters are faced with a series of bad choices and terrible candidates, and kind of looking at almost like the cast of horrors, and so to speak, of looking like this multi-candidate field. And through that field comes one person who is challenging the system and wants to do things differently to cut through the noise and try to show America there is a way forward. We have to kind of get over ourselves and cut through this field of like useless politicians. And I knew that I could write short story, and I knew that I could write nonfiction well. Okay, but when it came time to write a novel, I started writing this thing, and I was, the words were flowing quickly. And I gave it to a colleague to read, and she was less than impressed. I hope she would be. And it let me feel like I had missed the mark. And I fast forward 12 years later when I pulled that manuscript back out, because I ended up just tucking it in a drawer after numerous conversations with Sue Peterson, who was my colleague at the time, who was helping me kind of work through it. It was a polemic. It was a list of my political grievances of 2000, 2004. It wasn't a story that was driven by a really powerful, relatable character. And so in 2016, I started learning more about craft, learning more about what it takes to write novels and fiction. It was way more challenging than I even imagined it would be, because I just thought, okay, short story is one thing. Okay, just write 100 times longer and you've got a novel. Nope, that's not how it works. So I really had to dive deep into the craft of writing novel. And by the time I got to, there were some more life events that intervene. And so this manuscript keeps getting tossed in a drawer again and again and again. But in 2021, on January 6th, as I'm watching people like storm the Capitol building and break glass, and the sitting president like kind of cheering them on, that's essentially the end of the book that I had written in 2004. So it's coming to life, and I'm kind of horrified and somewhat tickled that something that I imagined 12 years ago had come true. And so I said to myself, perhaps I'm onto something, that I have some sense of the pulse of the American political spectrum or the journey that we're on. And I should do more writing about this stuff, but I've got to find a way, because no one wants to read a novel about something that's already happened. So right. I've got to find a way to pull this story forward, pull the threads forward, and figure out what is next. In 2023, major life event, it decided that I've got this time, and a little bit of therapy for me is going to be sitting alone at my desk and writing, and taking some things I've learned about writing and try to apply them in a way that really can create a great story. And what I discovered is I had to rewrite Bull Moose from start to finish. And by the time I got a quarter of the way through that, I stopped, because I realized I was just making some mistakes over and over again. I was telling the wrong story. And a friend of mine encouraged me to set that aside and write a short story about these characters, maybe make it a prequel or make it some aside story, in order to develop these characters and figure out what I was missing. And that was the Senate deception. I took Christmas of 2023 to work on the Senate deception. It came quickly, and it was amazing to me, because what I discovered was Ziggy. Ziggy is a character in my story. She's a sentient AI assistant, essentially, and she really has the power to drive the story forward. And my dogs are barking because someone.
That's fine. No, knocking. Sounds nice, actually.
Yes, they're guard dogs. So, what was fascinating about the Senate deception journey was discovering the character Ziggy. Allowing my story to be sci-fi in a way that I didn't anticipate, because although I love sci-fi, I did not consider myself a sci-fi writer, and I was not sure that I wanted to jump into the sci-fi genre and write sci-fi. But I just allowed myself to go with it, and it was amazing to discover how fun it was to write Ziggy, because she had the power, by being sentient AI technology, to make the story move in different directions that I couldn't do with just current technology or a present day setting. And that's what enabled me to consider setting this story forward in the future. It solved the problem of how do I try to predict future political event? Well, let's set it 20 years into the future, and let's have some fun with how the U.S. and the world gets changed by technology, and who are the powerful money people, who are the trusts that need to be busted in 2040, as opposed to 1910. And so then after finishing the Senate deception, I went back to Bull Moose, and I just ripped it up, started from scratch, and realized that the story I needed to tell was everything before what I was writing. And discovered some new characters, and that is what led me to write What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, and became a really exciting project, something I was super passionate about. And it was amazing. It took 20 years to find that story for me. But once I found it, then book 2 came right away, and I'm working on book 3 in that series right now. And I'm just in love with the characters, and I'm in love with the story and what it's saying about not just future politics, but our present day circumstances as well.
So you've got 3 novels out. 2 are Bull Moose novels. The other one is a non-Bull Moose novel. Now, Bull Moose, let's talk about the creation of this character, because we used to have a Bull Moose party in this country way back when. Teddy Roosevelt was the guy who created it. It didn't last very long.
Right.
But talk about the creation of your central character.
Yeah, so Jackson Piper, name that I came up with back in 2004, and that was the name. The title of that book was Bull Moose at the time, and the premise of that book was Jackson Piper becomes disenchanted with the major political parties and decides that in order to run for the presidency, he has to resurrect the Bull Moose Party in order to do that. When it came time to rewrite that story and write it from beginning to end, what I discovered was it was still a really cool story vehicle. It just had to find a different way into the story. And so instead of Jackson choosing to make this decision and do this, in my novel, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, what the purpose of that is to show that the 2 political parties of the day in 2040 are indiscernible. Even though they claim to be ideologically on opposite ends of the spectrum, what they have in common is they take money from the same people, and they have a lock on getting nothing at all done. And it, for Jackson, is troubling, and so he does something outrageous. He files for the New Hampshire primary in both parties, and he's going to run for both the old party and the other party nominations, which are the names of the 2 parties in the book. And while New Hampshire law and U.S. law doesn't prevent him from doing that, it's an outrageous presumption that one person could carry the banner of 2 very opposite parties. But he does it, and the key linchpin in the book is something we've seen happening today, is people just changing the rules in the middle of the game. And these 2 parties do this to Jackson, and he is forced into a situation where he either has to leave the race, run as an independent, or form his own party. And he is encouraged by other characters in the book that running in as an independent will get him nowhere. Leaving the race is the wrong decision. The Bull Moose Party is the way to go. And it is a resurrection of the progressive Bull Moose Party, but not necessarily progressive in terms of liberal, progressive in terms of reform. And the cover of the book is one of the things I get complimented on most, is this striking image of a North American bull moose with its fur painted like an American flag with these giant antlers. It's just a striking image. And what's amazing, too, is that when you research the Bull Moose Party, the platform of that party in 1912 has so much relevance to 2025 and 2040 2044 when my book is taking place. I didn't have to change much. I was able to look straight at that platform from 1912 and see that a lot of what the American citizens were calling for, a lot of what Teddy Roosevelt was calling for in terms of reform, has relevance today, like popular referenda, like recall elections, like overturning Supreme Court decisions through popular vote, like term limits, like taking money out of politics. So there were a lot of fascinating things. And I said, boy, let's just transfer this here and make this the central character of the story is this party, and see what exciting directions this could take. And so the series is called Bull Moose because, there's some success this party has in striking the right chords at the right moment, but then realizing that there is a real challenge to a tripartite partisan system in the United States. The duopoly we have today would be turned on its head, and a lot of norms and a lot of practices that we have today would have to be relooked at if we had three co-equal parties in power, and that's what the series is starting to explore as subsequent books unfold.
Yeah, I just don't understand why a third party hasn't come along when you have this vast pool of voters in the middle who are politically, they're socially liberal, they're fiscally conservative, maybe militarily conservative, and they don't have a party. I mean, I've never belonged to the Republican or Democratic Party. I never have, I never will, and I don't have a party, but it just seems that if there was a third party, then you've got some power sharing. They could, you could end up brokering deals between the two parties. As it is now, the duopoly just means it's a zero-sum game, and that's
exactly
that's it. Let me ask you: today the politics have gotten so crazy. I've been following politics since my college days. And I follow them closely. I'm politically involved just to the degree that I vote. I pay attention not just to TV, which is just completely partisan these days, but I read multiple newspapers and overseas newspapers as well, like The Economist magazine and Financial Times. You can just see how crazy things have gotten these days. Do you feel that as a political writer, it's given you a lot more latitude? Things that maybe in the old days you would have thought that's just too outrageous to even, include in a novel. But today it's kind of like, hey, anything goes.
Yeah, so a couple of things in that regard. First, I made the bold decision after this last election to change my party registration to Bull Moose, even though a party does not actually exist in Pennsylvania. So I am not actually a Democrat or a Republican these days, but I am a Bull Moose party member in Pennsylvania, probably one of 10 out of protest. I think there is something to be said in this moment that there is the Democratic Party is its 30-year low in terms of popularity. It has no answer whatsoever as an opposition party, and I think there could be a lot of power if we moved away from the ideological parties that we've been given since basically the Red Scare of the 1950s. In the 1950s, the party started moving to ideological bents of left and right. Prior to 1950, most Americans could not identify which party was conservative or liberal. They were basically pro-business or pro-worker, or pro-business or pro-family or pro-farmer. And so by moving our political parties to be strictly ideological, we're really leaving a lot of voters out. And that's why I think Bull Moose, the novel itself, is answering the questions of what could we do better if we had a system that reflected the wants and needs of all these folks who feel left out in the middle, either in the middle of the spectrum, or who feel like the two extremes are not answers sufficiently to the questions that we need to be asking. So when I started to really dive into the Bull Moose series, I started putting some fantastical things into the stories in terms of technology, also in terms of this question of the rise of political violence. What effect will it have on our political system? And Jackson Piper is confronted at gunpoint at his own political rally, and he has to respond to that. And I hope that never happens, but I had to imagine what it would look like if a presidential candidate was confronted at gunpoint and what he or she would do in that instance, so as to not look cowardly or scared, but also not look like they're a brutalist or that they're some kind of encouraging more violence. I also include there's a whole thread of conspiracy and a whole thread of an assassination attempt in the Bull Moose book. And at the end of 2024, I started keeping a running tally of all the things in my novel that had been coming true in the 2024 election. And two things happened. One, I had a lot of readers excited to explore these really controversial ideas in the political spectrum and like how they relate to today, but what they could look like in the future. I also had a whole group of readers who were so exhausted by the political environment they couldn't bring themselves to read a political thriller because we were living in a political thriller. And some people still say that we are. And so it's been fascinating because a little bit of like dip in interest at the end of the year, people just were politically exhausted. I originally thought the 2024 election was going to be a boring rematch, and I had no idea. That's the thing I missed in all my predictions, was just how fascinating it would be to have the major parties switch their candidates with 90 days to go and have multiple assassination attempts to rock the election and swing public favor for candidates who would otherwise be unfavorable. So now I think people are kind of over that fear. They're now just kind of living this moment. They're looking for a guide. And I think my political thriller, what has been said by readers is two things. One, terrifyingly plausible. So they're reading the story and they're scared by what's happening, but they can see it happening in a year or 10 years. So it's exciting to read something that could come true. They hope it doesn't in some aspects, or in other aspects they do hope it comes true. But it's also for them getting some sense for, okay, how do we respond to this as a country? If this thing happens, how would the American people potentially respond? And they're excited to see that in my writing, it's not a soapbox. And I was cautioned by my editor, Thea, many times that if you try to write for everyone in the political spectrum, you'll end up speaking to nobody. Mm-hmm. And it's something I really had to take to heart because I worked in politics. I lived and breathed politics. And it was something that was ingrained in my DNA, was I had to be careful who I offended because I would lose voters. And so as a writer, I had to make conscious decisions that I'm writing for a certain group of people. And if readers are turned off by the political philosophy in my book, I have to be okay with that. As long as I've got enough that are sustaining me as an author, then okay. But what people have said is, well, this political thriller fiction is fascinating because it's not preachy. It's not making you feel like you have to believe a certain ideology to follow the story and root for the characters. Because it's trying to capture this giant chasm in the middle, people can find themselves in that placement. And that's why Thea, my editor, and I went back and forth about whether I should call these parties Democrats and Republicans and Bull Moose, or I should call them the old party, the other party, and the Bull Moose. And we ended up on the latter because I wanted to not have D's and R's be the distraction here, and people like lining up in favor or against certain characters based on a known political party. I just wanted to make that secondary and really just have Bull Moose stand at the forefront. So when I watch Netflix these days, when I watch Hulu, all I see is political thriller. So Hollywood definitely sees an appetite for this. And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm in pace with the moment and writing the right tone of political. It's character-driven political thriller, which is different. A lot of political thriller today is just plot-driven, like Race Against Time, where here is a very character-driven story like Alan Drury would have written in the 1950s with Advise and Consent, like Ray Bradbury was writing with his political philosophy science fiction. So I'm excited to see if my character-driven political thriller can find a niche and find an audience that really wants to get excited and tied up in these 15 or so characters who are going to carry from novel to novel.
Well, I would imagine your agent has been working on that, trying to gin up some interest. And I mean, I've said this numerous times on the podcast. It's amazing when you're watching streaming channels how many are based programs are based on novels. So novelists have never had it so good in terms of just having their work repurposed for the screen. But there's so many novelists out there, but I think that every agent out there probably is figuring I'd be derelict in my duty to my client if I wasn't getting this in front of producers and film houses and so on. Have you had any sniffs?
Not yet, but it's early. We're talking about, let's continue to develop the series further. Let's also prove some of the marketability of this series and that there has a real audience there. And as much as I get super excited and feel like the moment is escaping us, my team continues to assure me, don't worry, American politics is not going to get better anytime soon. So
yeah,
you've got plenty of time.
You could be assured of that. Well, and the thing is, even if it does get better, which, certainly we hope it would, but, recent memory, the things that have happened are going to be, there's going to be an afterglow, and it's going to make the things that you write relevant still. Let's talk about I believe, check me on this, but novel number 4 is titled The 9-Hour President.
Yeah, that's
correct. That's in what stage is that at right now?
We're now going through draft 2. So, I feel like the story bones are there. Now we're going back through and fine-tuning the character development and the story arcs, and we're still shooting for May 20th release.
It's an intriguing title.
Yes. It ties to the events of the end of Tree of Liberty. Without giving too much away, the characters at the end of Tree of Liberty think they've solved, stopped the ticking time bomb of that moment. But something happens after they all go to sleep, and a person has to suddenly assume the presidency for 9 hours while the nation is sleeping, because some pretty horrific events that come at the end of Tree of Liberty. And not just like, oh, I'm a president for 9 hours and let me just sit in the White House and enjoy the space. This person in the novel actually has to solve an international crisis that threatens the world. And so that's plot A, is the president for 9 hours trying to solve an international crisis. And plot B is, why does this person trust Jackson Piper so much? So it's the backstory of what generates so much trust and love between Sylvester Billings and Jackson Piper. And it's takes them back to a different story and all the interrelatedness of these characters, which I find in politics to be very true. You find all these 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon, no matter what party, no matter what branch of government you're in, you're going to see, well, so-and-so clerked for so-and-so who worked on so-and-so's campaign. And so there's the DNA of everyone. And so the 9-Hour President also explores the DNA of Sylvester Billing and Jackson Piper's relationship. So it's exciting thrill ride. People who've done some beta reading say this is a great story. It's super fast paced. The technology is front and center, which they also helps drive the story. So I'm excited.
Pacing. I think pacing's critical especially these days where people they want things to move. A lot of people are very plot driven. I mean, your novel is character based, which I think that's my favorite kind of novel, is having a character that drives the story. But people definitely like a story that moves along quickly. Most people, because most people are reading for some degree of speed. They're not necessarily readers of literature. They want a tale. Yeah. Well, let's talk about your writing regimen. When you are in production mode, you're hard at work on a novel. What's your writing? Are you a morning, evening writer? Talk about how many hours you put in, where you do it. Do you have a writing room? That sort of thing. What's your daily routine?
Yep. So I have a desk on our top floor, and that's my space where when I'm sit down to write, I'm going to sit down to write without distraction. Nothing else is open but my writing window that I'm writing in. And I write best first thing in the morning, which is usually between 5 and 7 a.m. for me, as well as if I'm really on a nice thread, I can go from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. with some great writing. But my best writing is morning writing when I'm first up and I'm fresh and I've got that cup of coffee beside me, and that's where I can go 3,000 words an hour and maybe peak out sometimes to 4,000 words an hour where I'm just in the flow and I'm going.
Now, let me ask you about that for a second. When you're talking about 3,000, 4,000 words. It's a lot of words. So what percentage of those words do you actually keep? Because it's one thing to produce. I mean, there are people, writing instructors and so on, and novelists who, produce a lot of copy and then sift. Then go into this reductionism mode and boil it down to, it might only be a few hundred words out of that really pass muster. What's your process as far as that goes?
Well, because I'm a pantser but I write with a first an outline of the basic story structure. Is this hero's journey? Is this Hollywood beats? Like, what is the structure of the story? So I've got the basic bones of where I think the story is going to go before I sit down and write any word on any page. When I sit down to write first draft, I'm writing as quickly as I can, and I'm just getting thoughts to flow, and I'm allowing things to emerge, and I'm definitely creating inconsistencies as I'm writing. I might get to chapter 20 and now have to invent a character that I know I'll have to, in draft 2, go back and create something in chapter 2 on that character. They can't pop up in chapter 20. So, but it is just writing for volume. So draft 1 of What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose was 185,000 words when I got to the end of that story. And I got real stuck in the middle. Middles are deadly, as most authors will tell you. The death of the middle. And I got stuck in writing the middle of Bull Moose, book 1. But then when I finally found my way out of the middle and I started getting to the end, well, then I couldn't quite find my end. I kept saying, it's going to go, it's going to go, it's going to go. So then in draft 2, I went back and I got down to about 160,000, 155,000 words, but a lot of rewriting occurred. And the thing that I think I've struggled with and still working on in my craft is my dialogue, is that showing, not telling, taking the opportunity to have characters talk about how they're feeling or the things they say they're not saying that create the tension, as opposed to saying that they felt sad. So
right.
It's definitely just something you learn over time. But final draft of Bull Moose Book 1 is a heavier side of a Book 1. My editor would have liked to seen it smaller, but we ended up like 129,000 words. All said and done, Tree of Liberty ended up at 97,000. First draft was 120. So there's a significant amount of cutting. But I also find as an author that when I'm cutting 10 words, I'm adding 4 or 5 more back in. So I've got to find a nice balance. I don't feel like when I'm trying to just get in a flow and I'm trying to just create volume, it isn't just for the pride of saying, I've written 100,000 words. It's just trying to allow myself to just fully explore without getting too caught up in what I did experience the first time I tried to write this book. I had an amazing first 5 chapters because you write and rewrite the first 5 chapters. And by the time you get to chapter 40, you're under deadline. You're just trying to get the manuscript out. Spend a lot less time on chapter 40 because you spend all your time on chapters 1 through 5. But by getting in this new pattern for me, it's allowing me to devote equal time to the whole book. And I think that's a healthier way of writing as a novelist. And I think it also creates some more consistency in the story. I still maintain, what a lot of authors call just their Bible, eye colors, birthdays, major events, for consistency. Consistency is really important to me. And I want to make sure that if I'm going to go to the pain to describe a character's physical appearance, or I'm going to talk about their birth date, or I'm going to talk about something that's significant in their career and the date, I need to make sure I have that handy if I have to reference it, or multiple plot lines are happening. You're trying to make sure everything's consistent, because you don't want to have a reader who catches that and then emails you,
right,
you
exactly.
got this wrong.
Well, you said you're a pantser, but so in other words, flying by the seat of your pants. But do you have a basic outline you start with, and then you allow yourself to just kind of let it rip?
Yes, because I knew that the hero's journey, Jackson had to be approached to run for president. He had to go talk to a mentor about whether he should or not. He has to wrestle with that decision. He ultimately has to go out and then fail. and then has to try to discover himself and his real purpose for running on the way. And he has to face lots of challenges. And I said, okay, there's going to be an assassination attempt, and there's going to be a kidnapping, and there's going to be lots of political machinations that I witnessed firsthand in my own life. Let's write some of those in here with some of the names changed to protect the innocent. But it wasn't until I got to those chapters, I wrote a whole chapter of Jackson's wife, Catherine Piper, being kidnapped. And I had to throw it in the can because it just didn't work. It was in draft 1. It was even in draft 2. But by the time we got into draft, starting to try to find final draft, it just had slowed the story down. And it was a distraction from what we really needed to get at, which is Jackson's paying this huge price for trying to pursue the presidency, and he has to decide whether to carry on or not, whether it's worth it or not. And there's other ways to show that. So what I ended up doing was killing a character instead of having one kidnapped. And I felt the killing of this character that ends up dying in Bull Moose Book 1 did a better job of showing the price of this, and it happens a lot faster without all the drawn out, 4 or 5 chapters of a kidnapping and resolving the kidnapping. The death can come sudden, it can come unexpectedly, catch the reader by surprise, and it's a chapter and it's done. So for me, there's an outline. This is where I know the story needs to go. My pantsing is beat to beat, scene to scene, allowing myself just to discover. And the days where I write 10,000 words are the days where I just am excited and it's flowing, and I just can't wait to write the next few words. I haven't quite got the dictation stuff down. Some people love to do dictation for their writing, and I'm not there yet. I'm a little old-fashioned, but...
Well, what do you mean you're not there yet? Are you working on that? Is that another aspect to the writing that you want to develop?
I would like to develop. I think it would increase my hourly efficiency of writing, especially draft 1. But I find that my writing is different if I'm dictating as opposed to just typing with my fingers. I don't know why it is, but it's different.
And not as good. It sounds like you're not feeling like it's at the same level as straight writing.
I don't feel it's at the same level where I feel like I when I'm thinking and trying to dictate, the thoughts are like trying to formulate. It's stop and go. I get distracted by the app, thinking that I'm done speaking and not picking up the next word. Or now I've dumped all that into my word processing and I go back to it and I can't even tell what the hell I was trying to say. So when I'm typing it, I'm looking at it, and it's just a different physical, creative process for me to be typing it. So the answer for me is, be a better typer. And luckily, I am a pretty digital native in that regard. Most of my life has been growing up with a keyboard available at my desk since age of 5 in a classroom. So I'm a fairly good typer. I can move pretty quickly in terms of that production.
So let me ask you about, as you well know, as we all know, being a successful novelist is not strictly talent. It has to do with various characteristics that we might possess. What is the single characteristic that you possess that was indispensable, that did more to get you over the line than anything else?
Definitely resilience. You have to, this goes back to being an outdoorsman, right? I love fishing. I love trout fishing. And I have had days fishing where I have reeled in and cast out my line hundreds of times and not gotten a single bite, but it never stopped me from casting the next line or going out the next time. And so it's a characteristic I think you learn in being an outdoorsman, is you have to have persistence and resilience, and you have to be highly optimistic that the next time will land you what you're after. And in the same way, being a novelist, there has to be a resiliency because things are going to come up, deadlines are going to get missed, hundreds of people are going to say no before one person says yes. Not to mention your own voice of doubt in your head. The very first time I submitted my manuscript to my editor, she was silent for 10 days, and I thought Thea was just looking for a way to tell me how terrible I was and that I should just quit. And not, I should save myself the embarrassment of trying to put any of this through any more torturous editing. And she came back and said, you absolutely have the talent. You absolutely have the gift for this. You know how to create that end of chapter tension that creates the willingness to go to the next chapter. You've got some beautiful characters that just like pop from the page. So, but even though you've got another human telling you that it's good, and they don't have to tell you this, right? This is a stranger otherwise who could just as easily be okay by saying, nope, quit now. You're still going to, as a novelist, have all those doubts in your head. I'd be curious to know, to the extent that, Stephen King or James Patterson or anyone else who continues to be a successful writer still sits down and feels that doubt, because I still feel it at times. And I think that even though, you've produced something, you published something that people love and they can't wait for the next thing, there's still those voices in your head saying, this is no good, you are no good. So you have to be able to have that resiliency to push past those voices to the ones that say, this is worthy, this is good, this is fun, this is exciting, keep going. Yeah. And if you don't have resilience as an author, I don't think you get very far.
Now, let me ask you about how you found your agent. There's another area where resiliency is critical, because you send out manuscripts and oftentimes you hear nothing. Oftentimes it's just clearly a form letter that you get in response. Yeah. Talk about when you heard from your agent. I mean, did you get a reply email? How many times did you go out there before an agent saluted?
It's more than I could count, and I'm in the process of working to find a new, because, I think you also discover too that, whether or not it's a long-term match or not, are you finding the success on both sides of the fence? Are they finding success with your manuscript? Are you finding success and feeling what they're doing is worthy of your work? So you have to be prepared for lots of no, of which I got many no's. And sometimes they are more blunt than you wish them to be.
Of course.
Sometimes I think some of these agents take pleasure in telling you how absolutely terrible your dialogue is. But I found what has helped me is working behind the scenes in some writers groups. I'm working with a cadre of 20 thriller authors who are all working to query new agents, and we're getting feedback to one another on queries, on manuscripts, on pages. We do writing sprints together. This is a really, really important part of this work, because I've found how isolating and lonely writing is generally as a profession. So if you have other people, especially within your genre, who can share some of the misery and pain, I think it makes a big difference. There are some really cool resources out there. I think the internet has changed all of this for the better. And I think there's less of a monopoly by agents and by publishers these days. So I'm using Query Tracker a lot, and I'm popping back and forth trying to figure out who's accepting. I think I'm trying to find the agent who both wants thriller fiction but is also open to political nonfiction, because that's the author who's going to understand. That's the agent's going to understand what the hell I'm writing about.
Oh yeah. Well, that's a good point. Yeah. So you're in currently searching for a new agent.
Yep.
The agent you had didn't check all the boxes.
Right. And that happens, and that's okay. These are business relationships, not marriages, and so you're in it for success, for commercial success. And I think that's ultimately where there's been a lot of change and a lot of upheaval, and there's actually a lot, I think, of the democratization of the literary publishing world. So there's an awful lot of agents out there. So that's the good news. Maybe the bad news is they're all pretty selective.
Yeah, they have to be.
A lot of them are.
You can only
and a lot of them are not accepting queries right now.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had one on the program, and I said, "What do you do when you've got your full complement of writers and you're getting these, manuscripts?" He says, "I just don't even look at them." And I thought, well, that's depressing. People are approaching, and you're not even bothering to look at. Read the first, 100 words. So that's rough.
I think it's important to me in this process now to someone who is actively looking for what I'm writing, understands what it's about, and is going to go on this journey with me to make sure that, my stories I'm trying to write commercially viable fiction. So I don't want to just write because it's cute and fun. I'm writing because I want to produce viable fiction people want to buy and share and talk about. and maybe make it a movie someday.
Yeah.
So I think it's a journey.
What's the best piece of writing advice you ever received?
Wow, that's a good question. I had that. It was on this whole vein of show and don't tell, and it was about taking the time to allow the reader to get invested in the character early. So it's about the placement of those stories or those scenes, and don't rush them. Allow them to unfold, and you don't have to resolve every conflict in the story. You don't have to resolve every neatly with a bow. Because I was worried about some of the things in Bull Moose, got so long because I was trying to resolve every single thing, and the advice was like, readers are okay with uncertainty. You don't have to give everything a happily ever after or the doom. Everyone doesn't have to die. Some of the stuff, like in life, people just disappear. Some pieces are the MacGuffins, and you just have to let them go. So.
Yeah, some of my favorite novels, they're open-ended. It's kind of like you have to draw your own conclusions. It gives you something to talk about with other people who have. And same with movies. It's an open-ended movie oftentimes, and then just like, hey, we have something to talk about now. It wasn't all tied up.
Think of Catcher in the Rye, right? You just have to figure out, well, what's he do?
Yes.
Or End of Sopranos. Like, what is that meaning? What does the end mean?
Yeah.
And
that frustrates some people.
Those.
Yes, that frustrates some people, but other people
need black and white.
Yeah, and I think an awful lot of them, which I think is why Hollywood don't always, but very often it's let's put the bow tie, as you say, on the ending. And what would you say to the aspiring novelist who's trying to get in your position? What advice would you have for them? I mean, you just talked about the best advice you received, but you might have some other piece of advice that you would convey to them. What would that be?
I'd say if you're thinking about wanting to write commercially viable fiction or nonfiction, I think you need to understand the status of this industry today and what the moving parts are. But first and foremost, before you do any of that, whatever genre you're trying to approach, you need to go read a lot. Read for a year, and you need to do a lot of short story writing just to awaken those muscles in your mind and give them a stretch and give them a chance to develop. And for every 2 or 3 books you read in your genre, read 1 book on craft. Not a heavy one, an enjoyable short one that will help you understand either editing or plots or endings or dialogue, because that way, as you're reading the next novel in your genre, you're going to be more attentive to the decisions those editors and that writer made to make that story flow and enjoyable. It'll rise from the page for you. You'll see, this is why they cut this. This is why this isn't here. This is why this scene is happening. And you also become very adept at predicting what might unfold in the story. But I think to be a strong writer, you have to be a voracious reader. And if you're not reading enough, then you're not going to be successful in writing. So make it a goal to read more before you even commit yourself to writing that 100,000 page or 80,000 page manuscript.
One more question for you. What have you been streaming or watching on Netflix or other premium streaming channels that you enjoy or maybe inspire you?
Yes. My wife and I have this long binge list that we've been working on. Serena and I got through 2 seasons of Severance recently. So we absolutely loved that. And we've got through, I had watched the first season of The Diplomat because it has so many ties back to the West Wing. And because I was a huge West Wing fan when it was on cable television, I had to watch it on Wednesdays and Thursday nights, right? It was before it was on any streaming service. So I got Serena really excited about The Diplomat. We watched both seasons of that. I'm working through 0 Day on Netflix right now with Robert De Niro. And I'm also trying to get into Paradise, which I think is on Hulu. So I'm curious about, they're all political thriller stories. They're all taking very different angles. And I'm curious to see like how much of it is coming in contact with the things I'm exploring. Severance is just good psychological thriller. So I'm enjoying that.
Is Paradise the one that Carl Hiaasen wrote?
Not it's Secret Service agent.
Oh, no, it isn't. That's right. What he wrote was something else. It's called Monkey Man or something like that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I have watched
Paradise.
Is that right? My wife and I have watched The Diplomat. We enjoyed that a lot. It's really interesting. And a couple of the others you mentioned as well. She's a big Severance fan. I just haven't been able to concentrate long enough to really pay attention to it. But I watch it with her. But I'm always doing two screens when that one's on. So
I also enjoyed Shrinking. If you haven't seen Shrinking, that's a great comedy escape. It's Harrison Ford doing comedy is like, damn, where was this for the last 20 years? He's really got it.
Oh, wait a minute. I think maybe I have seen that one then. Yeah. Is that the one where he shakes? He's got Parkinson's or something like that?
Yeah, he's got Parkinson's.
That's right. Yep. I have seen that. I forgot that was the title of it. Yeah.
My challenge
he's actually
with
good at that.
Yeah, no, it's got some good lines, some good writing, for sure. I think my challenge with political thriller is it has to be really good political thriller that's in my mind believable, because I worked in that industry for so long. It's like watching ER with a doctor, right?
Yeah.
Like they're gonna be out minutes into it. Like that would never happen. So I'm in a similar boat. If I'm watching political thriller and something unfolds, it's just goofy. I can't stay invested. Luckily for me, The Diplomat, 0 Day. 0 Day is just like cotton candy. Not plausible at all, but it's been fun to watch.
But it's still fun, yeah. Well, Michael, thank you for coming on the program. I appreciate it.
Mike, thanks for having me. It's been such a joy and such a wonderful conversation. So thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for your listeners who have tuned in.